Left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, folks. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were more than 17,247 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about, I'll call it 600 new deaths, 598 new deaths over the past week. There's been an average of 16,270 cases per day. That's a decrease of 46% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 41% of the American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 51% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,320,000 people across the U.S. and killed about 595,321 people. President Joe Biden is pushing to meet his coronavirus vaccination goal of 70% of adults vaccinated through public-private partnerships, pushing barbershops, salons, and bars to offer free cuts, treatments, or beers if patrons receive coronavirus shots. In national news, NFL has pledged to stop race norming, a practice whereby the average mental capacity of black players is assumed to be lower when evaluating how much brain trauma they have suffered as a result of playing the sport, and therefore how much compensation they're due for their injuries. The head of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Anthony Fauci, had his emails from March and April of 2020 dumped unceremoniously into the public as the product of a FOIA request that has come to its culmination. Jamarl, I believe we're going to be talking about this stuff a little bit later. All of Anthony Fauci's, I don't even know if it's dirty laundry, I guess some of it, but all of his communications suddenly dumped out into the world. We'll be coming back on that, but, people have been posting them. I will put it like that. In international news, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning right-wing members of Israel's parliament that they must oppose the incoming government. This comes after yesterday Netanyahu was ousted from his prime ministership to be replaced by a coalition led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Netanyahu described the government that would come out of yesterday's coalition agreement as quote-unquote left-wing and dangerous. The head of the organizing committee of the Tokyo Olympics has said that the event will go forward. This just 50 days ahead of its official start date. She, however, also said that spectators could be barred from attending the event if Tokyo's coronavirus situation worsens. And by the way, it's almost spooky. They keep being like, yeah, the event's going to go through. We're going to do it. And I'm not asking them if they're going to do it, but they keep telling me they're going to do it. Now, I understand why they feel the need to tell me, because there's a lot of pushback against it and they have the coronavirus still circulating, but I'm not asking. It's, thou doth protest too much is kind of what comes to my mind. Anyway, Denmark has approved a new law that would allow asylum seekers to be sent abroad, specifically to camps outside of the EU, while awaiting processing on their applications for asylum. The EU's top court has ruled that Germany exceeded the EU pollution limits for over 6 years. 26 cities reportedly broke the limit, including Berlin and Hamburg. Sri Lanka is preparing for a possible oil spill from a container ship that has been burning off the coast of the capital. Mostly burnt out at this point, from what I'm led to believe. Officials in Nigeria confirmed that 136 students were kidnapped by gunmen on Sunday. That attack was at an Islamic State school. And in tech news, researchers from the Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence released their mammoth AI model, Wudao, which was trained on 10 times as many parameters as OpenAI's GPT-3 model. Their model is multimodal, meaning that it can do many different types of things, including write prose and poetry, generate text to describe an image, use text to generate an image, and predict the 3D structures of proteins, among other things. And that's pretty similar in some ways to GPT-3. That's OpenAI's model. But again, 10 times larger, 175 billion parameters for OpenAI's model, compared to 1.75 trillion for the new Chinese one. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, the race norming thing is ridiculous.
That is so wild. I read that story and I was like, wait a minute, it's 2021.
Yeah.
They kept that policy in place. And I would imagine on some level it's a profitable policy to keep in place. We have all of these players, many of which are African Americans, disproportionately so.
And that is a profit incentive.
Yes. And so it's like, we think your cognitive capacity is a little bit less, buddy.
Got to pay you a little bit less money when you come to us.
That's right.
Exactly. I hear
That's
you.
amazing. Like, I read that and I was like, this can't be right.
Yeah.
And then I had to read through it and I was like, wow.
It has a Wikipedia article. You can go and read about race norming and in different fields. And yeah, apparently the NFL, yeah, that's pretty serious. That popped out to me. I wanted to come back to that. Yeah, it's obscene.
Yeah, that's a wild story. And, you know, it's like these guys were playing under this. And you think to yourself, what don't you know about the various companies that you either engage with, or meaning if people knew that, would they still watch the NFL? Meaning, think of the number of African Americans who watch the NFL. Would they be like, I got to see that guy kick that pigskin, man? It's kind of, you know, I am sorry that they are rating your cognitive capacity as less, and maybe that individual here or there has a less cognitive. I don't know where people go with that. I think people would have issues, though, to put it mildly. I did not know that. Like, that's the dead peasants insurance thing, like the Walmart stuff, where a person dies, and when the person dies, Walmart gets insurance on the person who died, that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what it's like, this kind of behind the scenes machinations of corporations or companies. Yeah, that's gross. That's gross.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good, I suppose, that they're paying people off. I think it's like $1 billion. But yeah, I mean, the fact that it was there in the first place, greatly problematic. And that wasn't even put place like in the 60s. That was in the 90s.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Like, this wasn't like, okay, this was a policy in the 40s. That was, nope.
What, the 1860s?
90s.
The 90s.
1990s.
Just a couple decades ago.
Yeah. That's astonishing. I don't know what's going to become of that. I mean, this is their way of basically saying, okay, look, we're changing with the times. We're good, right?
Yeah.
That's that.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, is there a consequence for it? Probably not, because they're coming out saying, hey, everything is good. And the catch becomes, do people stop watching NFL? I don't see that happening. No.
Yeah.
And what does that say about us that we don't?
Well, we're more attuned to community and habit, and that's how our brain works. That's how our brains work. And my brain doesn't work, apparently. That's how our brains work, and it's just who we are. You know, if we've watched something, if we've done something, it takes a lot more to dislodge us from that.
Right.
You have to take the thing away. If NFL were shut down, then by definition, people wouldn't watch it. But if you're used to tuning in every Sunday at whatever time,
you're going to tune in.
You're going to tune in. And if your family does it, you know, you're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. I don't know how many people are going to see that story, first point. And among the people who do see the story, they're probably going to say, oh, great, the NFL is changing their policies on this stuff.
I'm guessing if you're into football, I'm guessing that if you watch it pretty diligently,
like hardcore,
you're going to be aware of it. And not even super hardcore, but just like you're a fan and you pay attention to the stats and stuff, and you pay attention to the news and politics of it or whatever. Not national politics, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You'll notice, you know, you'll see this coming up.
The head injuries. If a player decides, look, I want to be able to play football, and I don't want all of this padding. And what if the other players decide to say, we don't want all the padding. We want to be able to play. We're going to make millions of dollars, and we want to be able to get out there, and we want to play. And we know that the chances of us having cognitive damage is going to be higher, and yet we want the opportunity to play. It's like when they say, these guys are warriors, you know, talking about going on a big football field. Should they be allowed to do so? That's a fair question. I mean, it's an honest question. Should they be allowed to do so?
Yes. But should it be incentivized? It should be incentivized by all these big entities, whether you're talking about the individual sports teams or the advertisers or the TV networks, like the media complex and everything that gets built up around it. Should they be incentivized to do so?
How do you disincentivize that?
Should there be a big industry? I don't know. And that's the point in asking that kind of question. It supports itself because people want to watch it. Should we be watching it? And what's the line fundamentally between football and something like soccer? Yeah. The other football. Is it just the rate of traumatic brain injury? Is that what does it?
I think it's a 300-pound man with 2% body fat hurling himself.
2%? Oh, come on. A lot of these guys. 20% more like it.
Hurling himself at another man at top speed, running. It's full tilt. I mean, have you seen some of those hits? When I was younger, I used to watch football, and I mean, some of those hits, man, especially when you hit somebody blindsided, where the guy's going back. And I know that the person that's about to hit him is like he feels it. He's like, I'm going to make my paycheck right now by putting this guy in the hospital. And after he hits him, and the guy lays there, he's going to kick him. He's going to walk away. The coach is going to say, good job. He's incentivized to do that. That's his job.
He's not to kick him. I don't know about the kicking.
I'd kick him. I mean, it's like, I got to be mean-spirited. Like,
that's you, man.
It was like, yeah. And spike the football on top of it. No, but you get my point, right? The coach is going to say, good job, and it's going to give him another $10,000 for putting him in the hospital. And the incentive is there for it. And so it's like, why is there a traumatic brain injury? That. Even the thing with these guys, like 300-400 pounds, like on the line, hitting their heads over and over and over again. Or the people getting hit, the running backs. How many times do running backs get hit? I mean, The moment they catch the ball, 90% of the time they're going to get hit, if not more. Like, so, yeah, I think, it's going to cause brain trauma. I mean, the catch becomes, should we allow a sport if the sport is causing traumatic brain injury?
But who are we to disallow something like that? Again, if that's the thing. If all these people want to do this, and if people want to watch it, who's to stop them? I mean,
what about gladiatorial combat?
Well, yeah, for some reason my mind went to the Colosseum too, but I wasn't. But I think that a couple of interesting thoughts came up with that, which was one. These people aren't prisoners. These are people who've chosen to do this, unlike the Colosseum, where you would take prisoners and you'd thrust them into combat. For another thing, gladiatorial combat was, by and large, as far as I can tell, not always solo, but it was pretty often solo. Yeah. You'd have a single person pitted in the ring or a small group of people fighting alongside each other, whatever. Football is a team sport, and there's something about that I think we've lost. People really enjoy playing team sports. Yeah. And watching them is fun, too. And it's not just because you're part of a community. It's because you can see they're part of a community. You get to know their relationships. You get a sense for people. It's not soap operatic, but there's an element of like, okay, what are the dynamics? What do people think about each other? That whole thing. It ties into it. And there's a life there, not to be lived, but to be taken in and, held. I don't know.
A life to be taken in like a baby.
But no, a life not to be lived, but to be like perceived. Yeah. There's a whole life going on in the football community.
Oh,
All of these dynamics and things is my point. It's entertaining and not just the sport, but like the relationships from what I've heard.
The dramas behind the scenes and everything else.
Exactly.
Well, let's say for the moment it was gladiatorial. And let's say it was one-on-one. But these guys weren't forced to do it. If they choose to get into the ring knowing that they're either going to be maimed or killed, should they be allowed to do it?
Who are we to disallow them? That's the other thing.
Gladiatorial combat.
Yeah,
to the death.
And at some point, maybe this is where I get a little bit weird and anarchical, but like, if these two people want to get into a consensual duel, who am I to stop them? If one person wants to pick up a pistol well away from other people, and the other person wants to pick up their pistol and they want to shoot each other,
have at it.
I don't even know, but there's a part of me that's like, okay, it's their life.
There's a part of you?
How dare I?
How much of a part of you is there that says if these guys want to just shoot each other, or if these guys want to get into a ring, being paid money to put a knife into one another, have at it?
You know what? If I had to put a percentage value on it, I would feel inaccurate because I changed my mind about things. So I'm not going to do that. Plus, that gets a little bit boring. But there's a substantial part that's like, you want to live your life. You want to take your life into your own hands. How dare I or any community of people restrict you from doing what you want to with your life? Isn't that a transgression of our most fundamental right? If we're going to have one, choosing whether to live or die, choosing how you want to live and how you want to die, isn't that fundamental?
But is it a choice at that point? I mean, when you're in a society where that society is saying, look, we're going to give you all of this cash if you can get into the ring and do X or Y, and you say, okay. And you might say there's a lot of other things and avenues in life that I didn't necessarily have access to. Here's something that I do have access to. I have my fist. I have my whatever else. I have gotten great with a weapon. And, I mean, I guess the point I'm making here is all of this stuff is incentivized. Like, if you are playing in the NFL, you are incentivized to do so. There is no way to disassociate the incentive of the process or the advertisers or the team or the fans who are like, yeah, get them. Yeah. Like, all of that stuff plays into that person and that the self-conception of that individual in that particular contest. I don't think there is a way of doing it. The point I'm making here, I guess, is in any situation where there is a sport like that, where we allow and how far we allow people to do it. Well, I mean, depending on how far you go with that, meaning even steroids would fit into that. What if the people wanted to have an Olympics with steroids usage allowed?
Yeah, as long as it's above the, that's the thing. If you're going to have
think of all the downstream incentives that come from that. You incentivize people from using drugs. You incentivize people from particularly getting into industries where they can potentially kill each other. Is that something we want as a society?
But do we want to have a society? Think of all the downstream incentives of a society taking up the mantle of choosing for people what's best for them, and not, okay, I see problems in society. I see people that need help. Let's help them. But no, I don't like that you have chosen to do the thing that you're doing. I don't like that. I don't like that you're making this choice. Therefore, you can't do it. It's dangerous for you. Put your seatbelt on, kids. Sit in class. Be quiet and pay attention to what I have to say. Isn't that, you set up an incentive where you create an authority that gives itself and perceives itself as having the right to do all these things that, frankly, the people in charge probably they're not going to be more competent in a lot of ways than the people that they're judging. That's the thing, that the people over whom they have power often are better qualified to make decisions. This is not just a libertarian argument, frankly. This is whether you're on the left or you're on the right. A pretty primeval argument of a bunch of strains of socialism, of anarchism, and of libertarianism, but this idea of freedom that you best encourage like reflective, wise behavior when you give people the capacity to make their own choices,
Right.
and when they have to live with the consequences.
Yeah, but
Seems
in this
foundational.
situation, that's kind of my point. Society is pushing that. That's not the individual making a free choice to do it. That's a person who has a society that pushes and eggs them along. Meaning the very fact that the industry exists, meaning you're going to have people in a society to populate the industry. And just like we don't have child labor, we don't necessarily have people killing each other
But
in
we're also-
gladiatorial combat.
I hear you, but we're also mature enough as a human civilization or human race or whatever
we?
to reflect on the fact that society does these things to people. If you watch football, you're not like, well, I watch football because I'm the first person ever to watch football. You're aware. You
Yeah.
grew up watching it. You like it. Your family liked it. Probably a bunch of your friends like it. It's you know roughly why you like it. There might be some things you don't know, but you have a certain self-conception. You're aware that there's a heightened risk of traumatic brain injuries going into the business.
Right.
You're aware of all this stuff, and you're aware of all these pressures. It's not invisible to you.
Right.
You know these incentives and the money that you're going to be getting. It's worth it to you.
Right.
And from a cost-benefit evaluation, I'm guessing for a lot of these people, race norming aside, it's to their benefit to join the NFL to do all this stuff. And so who are you to tell them that they shouldn't do it just because you don't like them potentially knocking themselves in the head
Well,
and
I
getting permanent, and I don't want to downplay
Brain
it,
damage, yeah.
permanent brain damage.
I think it's a subjective slide, like most things. The NFL is one. I don't see anything wrong with the society telling people, okay, look, we don't want you getting into a situation where you're going to die, you're going to kill yourself, you're going to have traumatic brain injury, or at the very least, you're going to incentivize other people to get into a particular industry where they would do the same.
Okay, but I like bike packing. And bike packing isn't just bike touring on roads. It's like going remote mountain bike packing sometimes. Like you're out in the woods, you're on single track, going up and down over gnarled routes, that kind of thing. Should I not be allowed to do that? Because even though I wear a helmet, there's a chance, I twist my arm, I'm left stranded, that kind of thing.
Zero issue with
Where's
you
the
bike
line?
packing.
Where's
Zero
the line,
issue.
though?
Well, there's a difference between bike packing or telling people to put padding in their things so people don't get brain injury, and people going into gladiatorial combat where one kills and chops off the head of another one for some kind of cash. I'm making a point that says, yes, as a society, I have no issue saying that there's certain things that are barbaric, and having people kill each other in a gladiatorial ring, having kids working at companies, at 5 years old to make a paycheck, or for that matter, having football players going into an industry where they're going to injure themselves. I guess my point is it's exactly because of those incentives that there should be a higher power saying, hey, maybe you should not do that.
Yeah.
And look, the bike packing thing is different, though. I mean, that's you going. And by the way, I get it. I get the argument. I mean, as somebody who had illness for the longest time when they were younger, what you get is a medical establishment that has a certain perspective of the world. And by their perspective of the world, by their self-conception, the medical stuff matters more than anything else. Everything else is subordinate to the medical stuff.
They got a job to do.
They have a job to do. And so that rubs up pretty viciously when I'm like, hey, I'm going to travel the world. You're going to do what? Yes, I'm going to travel the world. And I need you to write off my prescription thing so I can, get the first weekend or whatever else. And they're like, I don't know if I'm uncomfortable with that. Doesn't matter if you're uncomfortable with that.
Now imagine if they
It's
could
not
have
your life.
prevented you from going on that trip.
They couldn't do that.
But imagine if they could have. Imagine if you lived in a society where they could have done that because they knew it was best for you.
Oh,
and
look, I agree
medicine
with
was actually.
I agree with you in the sense of individual behavior where you yourself are going backpacking in the wilderness and who knows if you're ever going to come
But
back.
what about society? Not even compelling. What about society, by its structures, incentivizing something? Just to use the word again. What about that spoils the pot for you? Why does that make it so different?
What do you mean? Incentivizing,
Yeah,
pushing people to do X or Y?
with football. Coming back to exactly what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It seems like the bone there is society incentivizes people to do it. People get paid to do these sorts of things. There are all these pressures in place.
I don't mind football. I don't hate football. I just, my thinking is if you're going to do something like that, a sport, don't have people injuring themselves. It's like with any other job. If you're working at Amazon, nobody would say, hey, it's perfectly okay for that guy to get stress fractures working at Amazon. And it's like, well, the guy chooses to. Yeah, because the guy needs a job and he's hungry without it. So I wouldn't, in the same way that I would care about the working conditions of people in the various jobs. I mean, that's why we have OSHA. That's why we have these other things to ensure that the workers aren't.
Okay, so to be clear, you're not talking about canceling the sport of football.
No.
You're saying that what you think is an organization like the NFL should improve safety regulations
Yes.
and make it so that people are less likely to get TBIs.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Yes.
Broadly reasonable to me.
Because
They're an independent organization. That's one way of looking at it.
Because I'm not one of those people who says, you should be able to stop somebody from doing something like that. If the person wants to get into the ring, let the person get into the ring. If the person want to box, let the person box. It's subjective, right? It goes into a particular scale. If a company, however, knows that what they are doing is injuring people or their players, and they're just kind of like, let's not say anything about this, let's just let this ride, then yeah, I'm going to have problems with that. And the NFL has allowed that to ride for a very long time and has made billions upon billions of dollars doing it. So yes,
I hear you. At the end of the day, I think we kind of agree on this one. I think that we kind of come down on similar sides. But you want to get everything out there. We got to close this one out. We will be coming back in a minute in our soapbox segment with Jamarl Thomas's monologue and our short back and forth. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I realize something. People are complaining about Trump. Oh my God, what if Trump comes back? What if Trump runs again? And all of these Republicans are lined up under Trump's fealty and allegiance and fealty to one Donald Trump. They remember the putsch attempt. They remember the two impeachments. They remember the calamity over the course of that administration. And they are terrified that Donald Trump will come back. And they're terrified of Trumpers themselves and the influence that it has on the Republican Party. What I realize, though, is that the issue here is not Trump. The issue here is a lack of commitment and a lack of urgency. Listen to this clip from Psaki for the moment. I'll make my point. Let's play the clip.
COVID cases are way down.
You're right.
Is there any thought here that some of the worker shortage could be driven by the extra $300 in weekly unemployment benefits through September?
I will say, Peter, that our economists and our assessment, and the assessment of many economists out there, is that the impact, the largest impact, are on issues related to the pandemic. And yes, you're right that the increased numbers, that's a good sign, it's a positive sign, but it's a 5 to 6 week cycle. So the data that was taken for the May jobs number, the jobs numbers that came out for April and early May, was from early April. That's almost 2 months ago, right? We'll see, we'll have jobs numbers come out on Friday. The vaccination rates are continuing to go up. And in terms of people being fully safe, fully vaccinated, it's going to take some time.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Peter Ducey is asking you a question about $300. They say, at the very least, Robert Downey Jr. was told to never go full retarded in that movie. I can't think of the name of the movie. But in this case, you should. You should be screaming at Ducey here. Is the job owner, is the owner of that particular restaurant, the sandwich maker, really that much more important than the worker having the ability to feed themselves? Do you care so little, Ducey, about the well-being of your fellow American workers, that them having the capacity for once in their life to not be on a subsistent wage, hand-to-mouth wage, to have a little bit of breathing room where they can finally say, I am not going to take a starvation wage job? That's what we're talking about here. This is not an issue of a labor shortage. Yes, we had 600,000 people fall off the face of the earth. That is very true. By the same token, that is something different than having people going back to various jobs. Those jobs are still there. For the most part, those people are still there. The issue is wage. Are you going to pay these people a decent wage? And fact of the matter is, when you had the opportunity to pass $15 an hour, you didn't do it. That conversation right there should have been very different. And it shows the lack of urgency and a lack of commitment. You should have been screaming at Ducey. What do you mean, Ducey? You don't want your American workers to be able to live, to be able to eat and feed themselves? What is your issue? Why do you hate your fellow Americans so much that you don't want them to be able to feed themselves? The problem here, believe it or not, is a lack of commitment. Joe Biden, when he got in, he came in, and you can almost say on a mandate. I understand that it wasn't a mandate in the sense of 60 votes and a supermajority in the Senate, nothing like that. But Joe Biden was able to win 2 seats in Georgia in a runoff, something that, if I'm not mistaken, has never necessarily taken place before. And he did that on this notion of put me in, put these people in, I'm going to pass these policies. I'm going to be the Joe Biden that you've never seen before in the 40-something years that I've been in office. I'm actually going to get some good stuff done. Joe Biden passed one policy, and it was a policy that Trump had been trying to pass for the longest time. It was blocked by Pelosi. So now we're in the Biden administration. Everybody's concerned about Trump. And now they're talking about a January 6th commission. And instead of, passing actual policies that would have been to the benefit of the public. Because by my estimate, you could bring these people back into the fold. 30%, give or take, went from Obama to Trump. And I'm not necessarily sure how many people Joe Biden has in regards to his win. But Joe Biden is going to have somewhat of a problem if he can't deliver. And the delivering is the thing that is not being done. If you are going to stick in this notion of, I got to work with the Republicans, I got to build in bipartisanship, I can't get rid of the parliamentarian, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm just the president of the United States, then yeah, maybe you don't deserve to keep the House or the Senate. The public gave you those things to get things done. And if you don't have the physical capacity, if you don't have the presence, if you don't have the physical capability to make your point to your various other Democrats, or for that matter, to inflict a cost when those Democrats don't necessarily fall in line, looking at you, Joe Manchin, then that is going to be on you. That is not a Republican issue. The 51 vote total is there. The ability to get rid of the filibuster was there. The ability to use the $15 an hour minimum wage within the budget reconciliation process was there. They just didn't take it. If you want to know why some of these Trumpers are losing it, I understand that Democrats want to put all of the stuff under race. I get it. And I understand why you would like to do that. But I strongly suspect here that a lot of the stuff bubbling under it is class. And if you eliminate that aspect of it, a lot of these guys chill out. That's my assessment of this. Joe Biden, Psaki need to be about it. Not just make those words and not just get up there and make those speeches and talk about Tulsa and everything else. If you're going to say that stuff, you need to be about it. And if you really are that concerned with January 6th, that concerned with Donald Trump regaining the White House, or for that matter, losing the House or the Senate, then you should get stuff done. That's your issue, getting stuff done. Shane, we have this. I was listening to Psaki talk to Ducey here. And she's trying to, in this kind of, teacherly, professorial, almost this kind of calm way, explain to him about the 300 and everything. Why are you doing that? I mean, this is what I mean when I say, taking this kind of high ground of framing. And in this case, the framing is you want people to go back to work on a subsistence wage so you can get your ham and rye, basically. Meaning, the person who decides to not work at the deli for $9 because now they have a little bit of leeway where they can say, okay, I'll wait for something else that's more than $9. That guy was working hand to mouth because he had to, not because he wanted to. And the fact that the jobs are available and people aren't working them, it's a testament to that you had a bunch of people, like I said, 42% of the public making $18,000 a year or less. That's a starvation wage. And so it's now people get a little bit of breathing room. Starvation wage job comes back. And they're like, that's okay, I'll pass. I'll wait. Ducey here is whoa, that's a problem. Those people need to get back to those starvation wage jobs. If you are Jen Psaki, what should be the framing for you on that? Especially if you are in this, we're in an FDR frame of mind and everything else. The the FDR stuff is just words, and it shows itself in conversations like this. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it'd be cool. I mean, we often talk about automation as like, okay, what's gonna happen to all these minimum wage workers when they get automated away? But you could also have a situation where people are effectively subsidized enough where they don't feel like doing the low wage jobs, and then suddenly you need people to do them, and then you're like, oh,
The wage pops up.
the wage is supposed to go up, and then you're like, oh, let's just create a robot, and we'll have that do
That's
that
the
for,
other part.
for-
That's the
for
other
us
really interesting.
instead. It's the simplest thing.
The $15 an hour thing with
and I guess-
McDonald's.
exactly. What would be cool here, and you can argue the $15 minimum wage. What's that going to do on the McDonald's end? They're going to have less workers, and they're probably going to replace some of them with machines, as they have already done in many places where you have remote ordering kiosks and things like that. You get my point. It would be cool though if we had an administration that was like talking like that.
Yes,
I don't know how, I don't know how else to say it.
1,000% agree.
But that was, instead of quibbling around the edges, and there are, in my opinion, legitimate complaints to give about universal basic income or some of these things, or even heavily subsidizing through unemployment.
At least had a conversation.
People, we've had conversations. But if Psaki were to be like, this actually isn't that big of a deal. What we need is a wave of technological progress in the next couple of years that will basically fill those slots, make sure that society functions, and then we need to invest. And this is where you would be like, yeah, hooray. You invest in education, you invest in elevating people, and invest in improving the amount of money that those people can make.
Yeah.
Now, I don't just mean learn to code.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what I mean, but I feel like there are enough things that need to be done that
1,000%.
we can find people to do them. I don't know how else to say it.
I got to be honest. I don't want a person working at McDonald's. Like, I think of all the capacities and the potentials of individuals. Dropping French fries, a machine can do that. But then the catch becomes, okay, buddy, where am I going to work? And it's like, yeah, that is a problem. It becomes that. It's like, I don't want a person driving from California to New York in a truck. If a computer can do it or a machine can do it better, the machine is not going to get blue. It's not going to get tired. It's not going to get, I want that. By the same token, the guys are going to say, yeah, dude, but what about my job? That's great for you on radio. What about my job? I need a job.
Of course.
And so it's like that conversation keeps coming up over and over again. By the same token, that conversation should be had. The automation thing, there's every incentive in the world to automate anything that you can automate if it cuts down in regards to costs. And so those jobs, especially driving, especially stores, I mean, like you say, you can see the kiosks in CVS, in Walgreens, et cetera. You can see them in grocery stores, all that stuff. That stuff is getting automated away.
It is.
So, yeah, it would be nice if somebody had that conversation off the table.
No,
This is going back to the old days.
It's the
stuff
conversation to be having right about now.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's either too late or too early, and it's not even like it's right on time. You could have started having it a couple of years ago. You could start having it a year or two from now. But particularly this kind of crisis where you have a bunch of people who are suddenly out of a job, not because there aren't jobs available, but because there are, but they're getting money because, you just went through a pandemic,
right?
And you want some people to get relief. This specific situation, in its own way, will probably incentivize a lot of companies to do exactly the automation that we kind of worry about in some ways and complain about, depending on how it goes. But if you had an administration that was like tactfully handling that issue and kind of optimistically and deterministically saying, this is what we're going to do, this is how this is going to go, this is our plan for this, let's make it happen, and it's going to help everybody.
It's called vision.
It's called vision.
Puff of smoke, Joe Biden.
I don't care
have
if
not
it's
seen that.
left or right. I don't care who does it. We really need some more people with vision. That's the fundamental thing. I think I focus a lot more than a lot of people on the left, or frankly on the right, on the quality of the individuals that you have leading organizations, whether it's a company or whether it's a bureaucracy within, a local or city or state or the federal government, whatever. You need good people.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of lost the art of creating good people. Education hasn't done a very good job at that, in my opinion, over the past century, at least in America. But we need to go into a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with Brian McDonald, head of the Russia desk at RT Online, talking about the meeting between Biden and Putin and Russia's view of all that's been going on in Belarus with Alexander Lukashenko, the strongman dictator of Belarus. And again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So there is a summit coming up in Switzerland. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin are going to meet and talk about some of the issues that are availing them. One of those things being Nord Stream 2. Of course, there's going to be the issue of Belarus. Biden apparently is supposed to bring up issues associated with human rights, but also China. And I think China is the most interesting aspect of this. It seems that the horse is out of the barn and that the United States is looking for a way to corner that horse and maybe be looking to one of its allies, meaning Russia in this case, as being, let's say, a dividing line in this case. So let's have a conversation about what is Russia expecting out of this summit. I've been fascinated by this because, well, A, I'm going to be in Geneva, but on top of that, I just like the idea that these guys are finally getting together. To have a conversation, we're joined with Brian McDonald. He's head of the Russia desk at RT Online. You can follow Brian on Twitter at 27KHV. Brian, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, guys. Hi, Jamarl. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. So these guys are going to finally meet. You've had 3 years of Russia Gate. You've had 3 years of calling Russia everything but a child of God. And Vladimir Putin being God King, apparently, of the world, with his hands in everything, basically, according to U.S. media. And it seems that with the Ukrainian issue, things hit, let's say, a boiling point on some level, and Biden called for a meeting. This also probably had something to do with China and the United States trying to mitigate China with this deep competition in the way that it said. What's the Russian point of view about this? What are they trying to get out of this summit or the expectations from the summit?
Well, that introduction you just gave there, Jamarl, just gives an example of how quickly the propaganda moves on, you know? I mean, like, we've gone from a situation where 9 years ago, when Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama for the American presidency, Mitt Romney made some comments about Russia being a geopolitical foe of the U.S., and Barack Obama castigated him for it, as you might remember, to a situation where the same Democrat...
He said Russia was the number one geopolitical foe, and Obama joked him, and the media laughed at Romney over that. Yep.
Yeah, and then 4 years later, Obama's own party suddenly regarded Russia as the greatest geopolitical foe, and that went on while it suited the propaganda narrative during the Donald Trump years. And now Joe Biden, Barack Obama's erstwhile vice president, has taken power in the U.S., and suddenly we're in a situation where he's open to a summit with Vladimir Putin, and many people in America are talking about the idea of kind of, I wouldn't say joining up, but let's say toning down issues with Russia to kind of triangulate against China. So now China is suddenly the biggest geopolitical foe. So in 2012, it was probably radical Islam or Gaddafi or someone like that who was considered to be the big political foe. Then it was Russia. Now it's China. That's how quickly the narrative has moved on in 9 years. I want to say something to both of you, though, to Shane and Jamarl, that if the American foreign policy establishment thinks that the Russians are so stupid as to suddenly forget everything that's been done to them in the last, 7 or 8 years and play all palsy-walsy, chummy with Washington again, they got another thing coming. They underestimate. One thing I would say about the American policy, foreign policy establishment is that, in my opinion, they overestimate China and they underestimate Russia. They seem to think, that Russia is, some kind of tie they can play with, that they can be friendly to it 10 years ago, turn it into the public enemy number one, and then expect to just turn on the charm again, and for the Russian side to just, sit there like, on their hind legs like dogs yapping for treats from their American masters. That's not going to happen. The American foreign policy establishment underestimates the degree the degree of anger in Russia, what has gone on over the last 7 or 8 years, and also the degree to which Russia feels that it's has integrated with China, particularly in the last few years. I mean, just this morning, I was reading about a plan to develop a passenger jet as a rival to the Boeing 737 and a rival to the kind of Boeing Airbus duopoly at the moment. It's going to be called Crack, which is very funny for an Irish person, and I know, and funny for an American too. But it's the Irish
that doesn't translate well,
spelling,
right? That doesn't translate well.
No, it's actually spelled CRAIC. Which in English means nothing, but in my language means crack, which means fun, actually, in our language. Okay, so anyway, so it's obviously going to be very popular with Irish airlines. Anyway, they've basically gone down this road. As you know, there's a degree of, like, for example, Huawei, which has been basically blocked in the West, the Chinese, mobile technology
giant, exactly,
giant, yeah. They are now heavily reliant on Russian engineers and Russian programmers, which have basically taken up the slack from the American and Western European staff they used to hire before the kind of furore started. So I think people underestimate the level to which Russia and China become integrated. China is now Russia's biggest trade partner. Before all this idiocy started over, Russiagate and everything, it was Germany. Also, I think Americans underestimate the fact that by the end of this decade, it is probably likely that China will be the world's largest economy in nominal terms, not the US, which will be for the first time since the British Empire, I guess, days, that the US has not been top dog, nominally speaking. And in purchasing power parity terms, China is already the biggest economy in the world. So I think there's a naivety there. I think the American idea that Joe Biden can just go to Geneva, wave a magic wand and get, the Russians to forget, as I said, everything that's gone on in recent years is completely naive.
We seem to have briefly dropped Brian McDonald. A fascinating conversation.
Yes, I was like, wow, keep. But he's right
too.
though. Like, you've had 3 years where they basically call Russia everything but a child of God, like I said before. And I've heard some pretty disgusting things coming out of the Democratic camp towards Russians in general. Russians, not like communism as a system, no, Russians. Very, this kind of xenophobic stuff.
You could be talking about James Clapper, who on the air, I believe, said that Russians are almost genetically predisposed to dishonesty. That was the one comment. Brian, I hear we have you back. You know what I'm talking about.
You do. Where did I cut off exactly? Was it on human rights?
Where was it? It was about 20 seconds ago. I know the time, maybe 25 seconds ago, but it was recent. You know what? I'll pivot and I'll ask you a question, which I was thinking of doing anyway, of course. Brian.
I wanted to answer your question about human rights. That's what I wanted just before you do that.
Go for it. Yeah, I don't think we got to
The point is that when Joe Biden said he was going to discuss human rights in Geneva, which has always been a kind of stick that, human rights is a stick that America uses in its foreign policy to beat opponents with all the time, as you know. Well, the Russian side were very quick to respond the very next day and said that they will also be raising human rights at the meeting in Geneva. For example, the treatment of the protesters from the stormed, the U.S. Parliament, the Congress in January, how their treatment also was mentioned, the treatment of Julian Assange and Guantanamo Bay. So the Russians have some human rights issues to bring up with the American side as well.
And I'm very curious to see how that will be received by Biden. Now, I'm going to go. We were talking about football earlier and got into like the soap operatic elements of it. Politics is rife with these soap operatic elements, the drama, the high stakes, the personalities, the relationships, the conflicts. It's constant. And you saw this with Biden and Putin recently when Biden made the revitalized and revived the soulless killer comment about Putin that he had allegedly said, over a half decade ago. Anyway, he said that again. That's from the public's perspective, what he thinks about Putin. Now, the actual opinions of one world leader about another might be paltry and compared to the real life, the realpolitik of the situation. But I'm still curious. You can answer it, or you can turn to what you think would be more important. What does Putin think of Biden? From the other way around, we know what Biden thinks of Putin. We know the perspective he's cast publicly. for an American audience specifically, what has Putin said about Biden going into this meeting? What do you think his attitude is going to be, Brian?
Well, people I've spoken to, Shane, in Moscow have said that that's not true, that exchange never happened, and Joe Biden has basically embellished it or fabricated it. On a personal level, I find it a bit hard to believe as well. I mean, Putin professes to be a devout Orthodox Christian, and it'd be very odd that he would say to Joe Biden that he doesn't have agree that he doesn't have a soul as a Christian believer, you
Yes.
know? But people I've spoken to in Moscow at a very high level have said that exchange never happened. And Putin is bemused by Biden's constant, reference to it.
And that would make sense. I do not want to cut you off, but I've said similar stuff myself. It's interesting to hear, and it's good to hear that from you that you've heard from other people that never happened, just to confirm that. But Brian, anyway.
Oh, yeah. And another thing as well, Joe Biden also previously claimed that he met Leonid Brezhnev when he was in Moscow in the late 70s or early 80s, and that was proven to be untrue as well. Joe Biden seems to have a problem with, recollection or embellishment. I think it's even established in America itself, isn't it, that some of the stories he tells are not entirely true over the years. Yeah, so I think that's one to knock off. What does Putin think of Biden? Well, Putin has kept his cards close to his chest. Putin, who's been in political life for a very long time now, has always been very careful not to take politics personal. He's never really made, disparaging comments about anybody, to be honest with you, any Western or foreign leader. I mean, when Biden called him a killer, his comments a few days later were to say that, the Russian expression, I'm trying to translate the English in my head, it was something like, what you say, what you say is a mirror to yourself, basically. Yeah. By Biden calling him a killer, he was basically projecting, how Putin replied on it. So what you say about me is really what you are yourself, I guess, is the best English translation of the phrase. So basically, we don't know what he thinks of Biden because he's kept his cards close to his chest with everybody. I mean, Barack Obama, I noticed in his memoir, wrote that whatever you say about Putin, he's unfailingly polite all the time. So even Obama, who said some pretty bad things about Putin, couldn't kind of get Putin to respond in kind,
That's the sense that I would get from a distance, that he's unfailingly polite, but that's reassuring to hear in some way. That is deeply, deeply gratifying to hear. Maybe just because I at one point tried to identify with that. Jamarl.
Oh, well, let's take the break and we can come back and talk about Belarus. So the voice that you guys are listening to is Brian McDonald. He's head of the Russia desk at RT Online. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are joined by Brian McDonald. He's the head of the Russia desk at RT Online. And we're talking Biden and Putin meeting, which they will be soon. I want to turn here actually for a minute to Belarus and to the situation with Alexander Lukashenko, the detainment of Roman Protasevich, the other political dissident who stabbed himself in the neck the other day. We had a conversation about this yesterday. I want to come back to this topic from the Russian perspective, which I don't think we've actually gotten into on the air yet, at least not recently. Brian, I'll pass it to you right at the start here. Very simply, what does Russia, what does Putin, what does Russia, what do they think of what's going on in Belarus right now? What are you hearing from the Kremlin in Moscow? And Brian?
We must have lost.
It sadly sounds like we have lost Brian.
Yeah.
A couple
You've
of...
not lost me at all.
There we go. Your audio is cut. Brian.
I'm here.
Brian, there you are.
I am here. No, it was actually my own fault. I put it on mute for a second. Forgot to take it off. Sorry. Okay. So basically, what do they think of Lukashenko? They don't like him. They think he's desperately uncouth. They think he's a bit of a, they think he's a bit of a son of a bee, if I can say that. But the problem is that he's their son of a bee at the moment, in the sense that, don't forget that 1 year ago, Alexander Lukashenko was trying to cozy up to you guys, to the Americans. He was ordering petroleum from Mike Pompeo, and Pompeo came to Minsk and was shaking his hand and having a great chat. It was only during the summer when the protests started and the change of power came in the US earlier this year that he became a sort of, public enemy in the US. So Lukashenko, they don't really trust him in Moscow, but because he's now a pariah in the West, he's got nowhere really to turn except Moscow. What I think, and what most foreign policy analysts here think, is that the Kremlin would rather get rid of Lukashenko, and they would rather Belarus transitioned to another leader, but they don't want a leader who's pro-Western or who would be likely to invite, say, NATO into Belarus. So until the circumstances emerge, the conditions emerge for a change of power that would suit Moscow, Lukashenko's probably going to be there for the short to medium term anyway. However, if Joe Biden were to come, you hear a lot in your media in the United States, that all these people from the think tanks and the NGOs, they say they want a democratic and peaceful Belarus. Well, here's an idea for you. If Joe Biden really wants a peaceful Belarus and a prosperous Belarus, why doesn't he turn around to Vladimir Putin in Geneva in 2 weeks' time and say, okay, we promise that we will never try to bring Belarus into NATO, and we promise that we will not, geopolitically move in on it if you promise to get rid of Lukashenko. And I think the Russians might agree to that, to be quite honest with you. If the Americans agreed to stay out of the matter and, recognize the fact that Belarus is of massive strategic importance to Russia, is its biggest military ally and part of a union state, I think Moscow would be willing to negotiate on that.
Brian, I have to disagree with you on that. And look, I could be entirely wrong, and tell me why. And tell me if I'm right, or tell me if I'm wrong. But, the entire NATO deal was once before this notion that it's not going to be expanded. And it expanded immediately the moment that Bill Clinton got in office. And so it's I don't know Vladimir Putin, but everything I know of him is on some level pragmatic. I don't know how you could believe the deal. Think about what Donald Trump did.
Gorbachev never got it in writing. But if Putin got it in writing, that would be a different story.
Interesting.
That's what I mean.
Interesting. Okay, fair enough. And you believe that if it got in writing, that would in and of itself be enough. Because think Donald Trump, for example, basically blew off the deal with Iran, JCPOA, in a heartbeat. I guess my thing is, what does writing have to do with it? If there's a potential
I take your point on that. That's a fair point in many, many ways. But don't forget that Donald Trump's moves on Iran were basically ineffectual because the European signatories to the deal stuck to it. The Germans, the French, the British, the Russians themselves, for example. So if some deal was made over Belarus where, for example, the Germans and the British and the French and all the other major NATO countries were also to sign it.
Yeah, but they can protect Iran at all. Part of the reason that Iran pulled out, a year or so after, was because those countries couldn't necessarily offset the amount of that they were losing from the United States.
The case of Belarus is a little bit different because obviously it would be about NATO membership, which those countries have a veto over. So it's a little bit different. Germany and France have the power to veto any application to NATO.
The civil. I'm going to pivot slightly. Civil unrest in Belarus, obviously, partly natural, partly artificial. It's like a stallion. You'd still use spurs or something like this. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya seems to be the EU's. What is left to be picked by the EU? If Russia had to pick either a candidate or a party, I don't think we know about them in Belarus. Who would that be, or what party would that be, Brian?
I used to think it would be Viktor Babariko, who's been in prison since this time last year. He's a former manager at Gazprom, which is Russia's state gas company. However, that is not considered to be the case anymore because Babariko has sort of allied himself with Tikhanovskaya, from prison. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but there is still. Don't forget, Lukashenko actually went into the prison himself and met some of the people he has imprisoned from the opposition. So basically, now it's pretty unclear. You would imagine that it would probably be somebody from within the existing system. Don't forget another thing as well, that in these countries in Eastern Europe, when there are revolutions from the street or political revolutions, it is usually system insiders who take over afterwards, not the revolutionaries themselves. So whereas Tikhanovskaya, for example, leads from exile a revolutionary movement, that is no guarantee that even if the movement were to succeed, that she would come to power. She's got no political experience whatsoever for a start. Look at Ukraine in 2014, where the movement was driven by the Svoboda Party, by people like Vladimir Klitschko, the former boxing champion, people like Yatsenyuk, who later became prime minister. But the person that actually came to power after the Maidan in Kiev was Petro Poroshenko, who had actually been a minister in the Yanukovych government, in the ousted government. He'd been the foreign minister at one point. So it was a system insider, somebody who'd already been inside the previous system who kind of reaped the benefits. And you would imagine in Belarus that if something like that were to happen in Belarus, it probably would be someone who, Lukashenko's downfall would probably be caused by a split within the elite, which is what happened in Ukraine. And you'll probably find that it would be somebody from within the current Lukashenko team who is considered favorable to Moscow. Now, who that person would be, I can't quite identify.
Brian, explain something to me. If Lukashenko was going to win, which it seems like he was going to win the election anyway, why rig it? Like, I mean, I get that there are reports, but it seems like the reports may be credible. What was the point in rigging the election? Was it just to have a higher total in regards to look? Meaning, if people were looking at it, thinking he's more popular than what he might be, what was the reasoning behind that?
That's a very interesting question, Jamarl, because I'll answer it in two ways. First of all, one of the problem with these kind of dictators is that, and you see it, all around the Arab world as well,
Over the past week, there has been an average of 16,270 cases per day. That's the silver lining, because that's a decrease of 46% from the average 2 weeks earlier. We've seen week after week after week after week of double-digit decreases at this point. Good signs. Hope they all keep going in that same direction. 41% of the American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 51% of residents have received at least one dose. And by the way, those numbers that I'm giving you there, the 41 and the 51%, those are all residents, not just all adults. Where Biden's plan is he's trying to get to 70% of adults vaccinated. The numbers would be higher. We'd be into the low 60s. As it is, we're at 51%. Anyway. As of this morning, the coronavirus has affected more than 33,320,000 people across the United States and killed about 595,321. President Biden is pushing to meet his coronavirus vaccination goal of 70% adults vaccinated through public-private partnerships. He's pushing barbershops, salons, and bars to offer free cuts, treatments, and beers if patrons receive coronavirus shots. In national political news, NFL has pledged to stop race norming. That's a practice whereby the average mental capacity of black players is assumed to be lower when evaluating how much brain trauma they have suffered as a result of playing the sport, and therefore how much compensation they're due for injuries, specifically traumatic brain injuries. The head of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Anthony Fauci, had his emails from March and April of 2020 dumped unceremoniously into the public as the product of a FOIA request. Over 3,000 pages of documents were made public, dating all the way back to January 2020. In international news, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning right-wing members of Israel's parliament that they must oppose the incoming government. This coming after yesterday Netanyahu was ousted from his prime ministership to be replaced by a coalition led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Netanyahu described the government that would come out of yesterday's coalition agreement as left-wing and dangerous, which is, I guess, I get the dangerous, but it sounds like it's going to be more right-wing. I think he's just, the presence of Yair Lapid, I guess, is tainting it for him or something, or he's just doing the thing that he would do and using political rhetoric to try to convince his right-wing folks to oppose it because he wants to maintain power. Anyway, more headlines. The head of the organizing committee of the Tokyo Olympics has said that the event will go forward, this coming just 50 days ahead of the Olympics start date. She, however, also said that spectators could be barred from attending the event if Tokyo's coronavirus situation worsens. Denmark has approved a new law that would allow asylum seekers to be sent abroad, specifically to camps outside of the European Union, while awaiting processing on their applications for asylum. The European Union's top court ruled that Germany exceeded the EU's pollution limits for over 6 years. 26 cities reportedly broke the limit, including Berlin and Hamburg. And Sri Lanka is preparing for a possible oil spill from a container ship that has been burning off the coast of the capital. In Nigeria, officials confirmed that 136 students were kidnapped by gunmen on Sunday. The attack was at an Islamic State school. And in tech news, researchers from the Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence released their mammoth AI model, that's Wu Dao, which was trained on 10 times as many parameters as OpenAI's GPT-3 model, 175 billion parameters versus 1.75 trillion. The Chinese model is multimodal, meaning that it can do many different types of things, including write prose and poetry, generate text to describe an image, generate an image when that image is described by text, and predict the 3D structures of proteins, among other things. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And Jamarl. We've got about 10 minutes here before we go to our next guest. Now is as good a time as ever, I'd say. Let's talk about Fauci. Let's talk about these emails.
Go for it.
So, thousands of these things released, thousands of these emails released. From this, a pretty contentious period, early 2020, when the word of the coronavirus was first spreading. Some folks were starting to get worried about it. and up through when lockdowns were being implemented, and it became a really big deal internationally, shutting down global trade, doing all of the things that anybody alive and conscious would have seen it do over the last year plus. Anyway, Fauci, receiving emails, sending them, these get released. They're being scrutinized as they would. Republicans are hitting him hard, and of course, Republicans are hitting Democrats for putting up with him. Unfortunately, there are a lot of these emails. There are thousands of them. I've only read a couple of them. And so you're going to have to, when we have this conversation, you're going on limited information.
Right.
I'm not
because
doing
there's so
this.
many, right?
There's so damn many. I've read a couple of them. Exactly. Just to be clear. Now, a lot of what which makes me think, in the same way that politicians don't have time to read an omnibus bill, the point is it's too big. It's too big to fail and too big to keep from passing, whatever, which, you don't have time to get actually into the meat of what it is that you're supposed to be passing, supposed to be discussing. The same thing is kind of true here. I've read a couple of them. We've read a couple of them, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about is other people talking about them, many of whom have undoubtedly only read a small selection of these emails. It's one of the ironies of this situation. Anyway, having said all that, from what I've said, there is some kind of scandalous stuff, depending on how you paint it.
Go for it.
Not scandalous in the sense of Fauci's dating a 19-year-old behind the scenes, but scandalous in the sense that, like, he's pursuing a movie deal and sort of courting the PR people and keeping that ball rolling, all while the pandemic is in full swing.
Yeah.
And he's ignoring messages from people, and this is what a lot of people focus on. I see some folks criticizing Fauci for ignoring the idea of a lab leak from China that fits into the current media push on that stuff, so he's getting hit by Republicans on that. But I also see him simply rejecting information because it's, coming in at, I'm guessing, a pretty fast rate.
Yeah.
With a lot of it, I understand. I'm willing to empathize with him a little bit, but at the same time, he's courting his media people about this movie that he's making while he's ignoring potential treatments, saying that they're too long to read, that these emails that he's receiving are too long to read. That's the sense that I get of his priorities, and it's probably because the well has already been well and thoroughly poisoned that I don't trust. I don't trust Fauci. I'm willing to give him less credit than I would. But these emails don't make me like him more. They make me feel a little bit more like he's a self-serving career bureaucrat politician who mishandled this crisis marginally, made some mistakes, has yet to fess up to them, and was then turned into a political tool and made one of, happily on his end, by Democrats trying to hit Trump at every turn during early 2020. That's my spiel. Jamarl, what's yours?
And how many of these emails have you read to come to this?
About 4.
Intense proclamation.
about 4.
Because it seems like Fauci was getting 1,000 messages a day at one point. Like, that's extreme.
It is.
So
yeah.
How does this 80-year-old man keep up with 1,000 messages a day?
Oh, man. Well, hopefully he takes some lessons from Biden. Because there's a lot to go on there, I'm sure.
I guess you get my point of where I'm going with this. I agree with you that Fauci made some problems. The mask thing, you and I disagree on. Because to me, it's like there are times where, lying becomes, but there's a line by Thursday. Well, there's a line by
gaslighting me, Jamarl.
Take It Back Sunday where my wife was listening. He says, "I never lied to you until I had to. I do what I got to. I do what I got to. That's the truth." And she's like, "What?" She was like, "You just said I never lied to you."
Hold up for a second.
Right.
We need to analyze this.
Yeah. I never lied to you until I had to. Yeah, it was right. She was like, "What?" It's that. It's later on where I have problems with Fauci. Because Fauci has said things that were somewhat dishonest later on.
Go into some
they're not
specifics
leaping
here.
to my mind at the moment, but I do remember it saying, "Whoa, Fauci, you can't do that. That's a problem."
I think I might know what at least one of them was.
Yeah. But this was
after
like later
people,
on.
Yeah, it's after people getting vaccinated, the idea that they should still be wearing masks.
Yeah. Yes.
That's one of them.
But I guess I look at this and I think to myself, Fauci was getting slammed with messages constantly. Now, as an individual doing a job, he is working in government. But like anybody else, let's say if like you were doing this and you had your YouTube show, or if somebody was doing their government job, but they were also had a book deal, he had a book deal. And just like anybody else, whatever his capacity in government, he is also a person who needs ends.
A movie deal.
Yes.
Movie deal.
And
not
so,
just a book deal.
Okay, a movie deal. But I guess my point is, that's not shocking to me that he would court.
It's not shocking to me, but come on, man. If you were a Republican, if you were in charge of handling this crisis,
yes.
and you saw, instead of responding to people who are requesting a reception, who like have good advice, instead of prioritizing all of his mental resources to saving the lives that he know will be lost, he's in a position where he can see, okay, this is not going well. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of deaths. This is my responsibility. I need to make this my night and day. Instead of doing that, he's courting media. Isn't that all those appearances?
It's Trump's responsibility. Trump is president.
He was the head of the White House coronavirus task force. Was he not the individual who was put in charge of this specific thing?
Yes, but he's always limited by the responsibilities of the president of the United States.
How did Trump limit him?
For example, if you're not making masks, if you're not making ventilators, if you're not making the resources available to the various hospitals and everything else, then if Fauci comes out and says, hey, I need all of you to mask up, and they're not masked, then meaning Fauci is always going to be limited by his superior. I mean, even Fauci's language was always weird around Trump. I mean, Trump hated Fauci, but Fauci still curbed his language to be more in line with Trump. So it wasn't like this dramatic departure where he just said, okay, Trump, I'm going to do my own thing. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He never did that. Yeah. He does it now. Like when he was with Biden and he's like, all right, I'm in the safety of Joe Biden. All right, just screw you, Donald Trump. Like he was waiting for Donald Trump to leave the White House. Couldn't wait for it. Just wait. He was like, please, just let him leave. Like now he'll do it. But back then, no, he was curbing his language to be more in line with White House wants. Now, you could say that's dishonest. You could say he should have been more boisterous about how he took it. You could say all that stuff. Fauci would have been out of a job, and maybe you could say that's what he should have done at that point. You.
What is 100% clear and what makes this a self-perpetuating media story is, one, that the perception, and I believe it is accurate among Republicans, that if this were a Republican, that he would be hit on exactly this.
Yeah.
And that, two, it's bad optically.
Yeah.
And it might be tautological. Well, this is bad optically, so we're going to give it optics or whatever. You know what I mean? But
right.
But it's true, and that's what gives it legs. And at the same time, reading through the 4 that I've read, I can also say it's a little bit. There's definitely something there, Jamarl. Right. There's definitely a problem. But I
don't know. I look at him as a person, and like anybody else, it's like, all right, these guys are going to give you, I don't know, $5 million. This other guy is bugging you about this virus.
Yeah.
Which one do you go towards as a person, right? It's like, how much is that guy giving me? And you might have gone through 20 emails, but you're getting like 1,000 emails a day. Like, so it's like, even if you do go through 20, well, how much is enough?
This is where Fauci needs his own AI. Just tying the loose ends together. Yes. He needs an AI to read the emails, verify them for him, and then kill whoever sent them mercilessly.
Yes.
And then he'll stop getting the emails. And all his problems will be. Anyway, I'm just kidding, Jamarl.
But no, those emails are going to be scanned through like nobody's business, especially by right-wing media. I would imagine Rand Paul has his own person that he fired just to go through those emails to find
100%.
Anything incriminating about Fauci, what he knew, when did he know it.
Yeah, Rand Paul set himself up.
With leak stuff. Like we really got to get on a doctor about that. Like even that.
The lab leak stuff you said, right?
Yeah, the leak stuff where it's the leak hypothesis, where it's like beforehand off the table, and now all of a sudden on the table. Fauci at the time was like, yeah, this is impossible, etc. And now everybody's talking about it. It's like, well, Fauci, you said it was off the table. Now what? Meaning it makes him look bad.
I love
the position.
I love that we still ask. I love that we're not quite goldfish yet. That we still have the capacity to be like, wait, you guys changed the story all of a sudden.
Right.
What's going on here?
Right.
I love that there is that the public has enough sense, which they do, to humanity's credit. But Rand Paul positioned himself perfectly on this one, in my opinion, setting himself up as the anti-Fauci lockdown, anti-lockdown, anti-Fauci dude in Congress who's willing to get up there and
for his base,
debate for his base. That's a great move, and it's a way for him, I think, to appeal to a lot of Trump's base without doing some of the nastier stuff, the more QAnon-y stuff that Marjorie Taylor Greene has verged into.
Yeah, but unfortunately, she is the party. I mean, I don't think she is. I don't think she is a party. And I should explain that. I don't think she is a party in the totality of the sense of every Republican is Taylor Greene. I think she's in a party in the sense of the energy in the party is in a particular direction, and she is dead center, standing in the middle of it.
No, I don't think that. I think that there's a significant minority of folks. It would be like if I said the party were, if I said the Democrat Party were a bunch of woke Antifas out there heckling. No, they're not. That's a small contingent who might set the conversation in some way, and certainly that's what Republicans are worrying about. But in the same, it's Democrats worrying about Marjorie Taylor Greene's base are justified, but I wouldn't say that's the party.
Okay,
that's my take.
I don't know. I guess I look at how these guys are lining up, and I look at their fealty and allegiance, and she is basically a Trumper. That's all. I mean, no more, no less. That's all she is.
I hear you.
And if she is a Trumper and all of these other Republicans are lining up behind Trump, then to me, that's where the energy in the party is. And so whether or not each and every one is a QAnon, whether or not each one even likes Trump, McCarthy, I think hates her. If he could get away with it, he would stab Trump in the spine and run away and abscond in the sewers to get away.
I don't know that these people feel any more emotions than they need to get reelected, honestly.
Really? I
Yeah.
think they're human. I think they're human beings. I think they're practiced at what they do, but I think they're human beings.
Their
I think
humanity is significantly attenuated by the grasping for power.
I think when McCarthy was in that room and those people were banging on their walls, trying to break that door down, I think he had a talk with Jesus. Like, I think he was
You talking
really.
about Trump? What are you
I think
calling? Hold on a second,
legitimately
Jamarl.
freaked out.
He was on the phone with Trump. Are you trying to identify?
No.
What are you?
I'm trying to say he had a moment where he probably
had a
thought he was going to
heart-to-heart
meet his
with
maker.
God.
He was terrified.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I think those guys are annoyed with Trump. I think they're angry at him. Like, they're under normal circumstances, they're untouched. They make choices. They press a button and something, somebody died somewhere in the world. They're untouched by this stuff. And all of a
I
sudden,
think there's something.
touched.
You know that idea in like human sexuality and attraction and stuff, that there has to be something at least a little bit disagreeable or disgusting for you to feel well and truly attracted to somebody. Have you heard this theory?
I've never heard this one.
Now,
Go
maybe,
for it.
I've heard this and I didn't come up with it. And maybe I just remember it because there are parts of me that are definitely well and truly disgusting.
Yeah.
So I was like, that sounds good. But maybe there's something similar going on with Trump where they might hate him.
Yeah.
But they're still gonna elect him or whatever. But they're still, they might hate him. But the disgusting, disagreeable stuff might just pull them in a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't know. We got to go into our break.
Yeah.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with our next guest, Peter Coffin, talking about the media pivot on the idea of a lab leak of COVID-19, also corporate pride. And I'm not talking about fond memories of GM looking back at its halcyon days, whatever. I'm talking about pride, the LGBTQ plus, etc. festival that has been corporatized and appropriated, and what exactly that looks like, what pride is, capital P pride in America at this point. Again, that conversation will be with Peter Coffin, and it will be on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you were around just a few months ago when the leak first took place, especially when Donald Trump was in office, it was off the table, entirely, completely off the table, to have a conversation about the idea that this virus came from the lab in China, that it came from a leak. It was understood almost as air to lungs that this was something that came from an animal that crossed in some kind of area somewhere in the market somewhere. But now, all of a sudden, the world has changed. Now, does that have anything to do with Donald Trump, that because Donald Trump said it, the media was against it? Does it have anything to do with Biden and this deep competition with China that he's having, where this is now also on the table in addition to the genocide? Whatever the reason and the rationale for it, it's amazing the way this flipped on a dime and went from off the table, not up for discussion, Facebook, Twitter, these guys, oh, you can't talk about that, you can't talk about that, to all of a sudden, fair game for discussion. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a YouTube comedian and author known for their eponymous channel, and for being recognized as one of YouTube's first 50 partners back in 2006. They've gained widespread popularity for their original comedic sketches, parodies, and characters. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore how reality works in a world where profit is the driving force. And here we are. Peter, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I know you've had to see this as it was taking place, like a fish in water. Very amazing in the way that it almost turned on a dime, where initially off the table for discussion, then all of a sudden on the table for discussion, everybody's talking about it. None of the data has changed. None of the data has changed. I think that needs to be explained, meaning nothing has changed. It hasn't been like, oh, we found this missing link. No, nothing like that. So
we had basically a single paper came out back in January, I believe, that was saying that there's like some degree of possibility of this. But the main reason I feel like the whole media narrative has changed is Biden has suddenly directed the CIA and his NSC to start investigating this again. And Biden put out a statement on, I think it was the 26th of last month.
Yeah, but the media narrative changed before that.
Yeah.
Oh, Peter, please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just saying, make the point that the media narrative changed before Biden decided to tell the CIA or intelligence to try to find information.
Yes, it did change. We had, like I said, that study that had came out in January started getting amplified a lot during, I want to say about mid-March, it seems like. And then it seems like in response, the White House, Biden, sort of shifted their rhetoric. They're claiming that like an element of the CIA and the NSA, there's a current, I think is the word that they used in the statement, that believes that there's a possibility that it was a lab leak. But here's the funny thing. You know, I spent a bunch of time looking into this lab leak, and the U.S. government has put money into the Wuhan virology lab. Actually, it's really hard for me to trust basically any side of this at this point.
I hear you. I'll be honest.
In terms of information.
Yeah, that's where you are left a lot of time. Peter, I'm sorry for cutting in.
Oh, no problem. I was going to say, in terms of information, like was said, nothing's changed. Like all of the studies are still like heavily leaning towards animal, but at the same time, we have like media narrative shifting. And I think, and this is just me kind of teasing it out, I feel like it's because we're kind of in this Cold War with China.
Yeah.
I feel like it's more convenient for the U.S. government now with, where we are with China to be a little bit more antagonistic at this narrative, because if it's somehow China's fault and if you can, like, things haven't really particularly changed in terms of, we did have the vaccine happen under Biden, but that was in motion before Biden.
Yeah.
It hadn't really given us a whole lot in terms of a big change in the COVID landscape. So, I mean, if we can shift the blame elsewhere, it's convenient for the U.S. government.
Well, it was convenient for Trump, and that was what plenty of Democrats saw when Trump was calling it the China virus, and they derided him for that.
It was,
and that was
bingo, exactly.
It was partly when Trump was pushing back against it. That was where it was set in stone. Thou shalt not believe this story. Thou shalt not spread this story, because it was a tribal affiliation thing with Trump, and also, it's more than that. For whatever reason at the time, the Democrats weren't wanting to be hard on China, probably because Trump was perceived as being hard on China, and they wanted to be hard on Trump. And so it's just the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and all of the conjugates or whatever of that come out. But obviously, as we're talking about, all that has changed. And thankfully, I see people who've been talking about the Wuhan lab leak for over a year now. Around a year, maybe a bit under, maybe a bit over, whatever. And a lot of these people seem qualified to talk about it, talking, whether they are medical professionals or people who have degrees in virology, or whether they're just like VCs and biotech. I see people talking about this. They've been talking about it for a while. And they look at what's going on right now. I've seen a couple of them say this. In their eyes, it is palpably obvious, and I've seen them post it on Twitter and other places, the change in the media right now is exactly what you just said. Biden is deciding to go hard on China for foreign policy reasons, the whole informational landscape on this issue has shifted. And it seems to me like on both that side of things and on the idea that we were talking about this a couple minutes ago. I'm glad that the public is aware how radical, sudden, and arbitrary seeming the shift on this story is. And I think a lot of the public, if you're aware of that and you ask yourself, or you even feel the question in your mind, why? What's the actual reason here? What else is obvious is it's against China. I feel like the public is increasingly aware of both of these things. I think even on an intuitive or a subliminal sense, we get what's in the water. We get we get what we're being told about this kind of thing. So most folks, I think, feel that and see that, which leads me to wonder, will this work? Is it working? What do you see, Peter? Do you see people successfully being sort of agitated against China, or giving it a lot more credence than they would because it suits, the U.S. foreign policy interest? Or do you see people pushing back against the idea because they realize that they're being sort of biased and misled potentially by the U.S. government here and by Biden? Peter, what do you see?
Well, I unfortunately, you kind of see two currents of it, the same as what the CIA is claiming. There are people who have been saying this for a year, that I've seen two ends of that. There have been people who've been saying this lab leak hypothesis for a year who are suddenly a little bit like, I don't know if the U.S. government is suddenly here on this. Like, there's a lot of people that are just very suspicious of the U.S. government in general, which rightfully so.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people who are also, I see a lot of people who are kind of touting this, like, oh, they've been saying it for a year. It's correct. It's like we got through to them. And it's like, I find it very hard to accept that kind of a thing. I see agenda in this, and I think that a lot of people see agenda in this. And I think that you're right, that there are more and more people who are able to see, like, oh, China's a superpower. China is, at this point, one of the largest rivals of the U.S. Biden keeps characterizing them as our competition. I do think that you are right. I do think that there's more people that understand this is the type of thing that is being used to characterize, as opposed to simply find the truth, so to speak.
And throw in the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which it could be taken, of course, as its own thing. But I remember seeing the day that Biden announced that by September 11th we'd be withdrawing our forces. At the top of the Washington Post on their website, top of the fold, that kind of thing, people asking questions: is Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan a pivot to China? And then it might have been above this where I saw Biden should use his withdrawal from Afghanistan to pivot to China, that kind of thing. And I'm paraphrasing slightly, of course, because I'm not looking at a month or so ago when I was the first time, but I don't even think folks need to be aware of that to see the connection here, but that definitely adds to it. Certainly. And in a weird way, you know what, Peter, my mind went to you on this issue, I think, because we talked to you about the CIA with their intersectional ad, their advertisement, their recruitment ad. And there's something that connects this and obviously the Pride story that we're going to be going on to talk about, corporatized Pride, with like intentional deception and steering cultural movements. It just seems to tie together. That seems to be how it works. And what's worrying to me, and this shouldn't be surprising to a lot of folks about the CIA, it's supposed to be an international agency. That's, the FBI is the domestically oriented one, the CIA is the internationally oriented one. Of course, the suspicion that folks have had and the assumption that a lot of people have had is that, well, that has never been the case, or if it has, it was a long time ago. The CIA has been inwardly oriented for sure. And a lot of this stuff seems to be proof of that, specifically the woke ad. And we can get into the military intel and the military contractor, and in general, the military industrial complex backing of Pride. But I think you might see what I'm saying. The cultural co-optation and trying to get ahead of stories and push culture in certain directions by intelligence agencies. And the screwed up part is that I think it might be working in a lot of these cases. I don't know about the lab leak story, but what do you think, Peter?
No, I think that you're spot on with that. That would ultimately be where I would go with this. Like, in terms of like where the news goes, where is it sourced from? Sourced from the U.S. government. Where is the U.S. government creating these narratives? It's the CSA or CIA. It's the NSA. It's these deep state organizations. They're sort of churning this stuff out and doing all of these things in the background. I feel like, yeah, I mean, it sucks, but like when you think about it, we're not really, you see people complaining about how the narrative shifts so often on things like COVID. And like, it's not because the media is following science, although it could be, and that would definitely be, that would be a thing that would cause it to shift from time to time. But the way that it's shifting is more U.S. official narrative.
Yeah.
And that official narrative does stem from the CIA, the NSA, the Center for Disease Control, these state actors. Ultimately, that's where that comes from. And ultimately, you can find, especially in this thing, with the lab leak hypothesis, if you look, all of the science, nothing has changed. There is literally nothing that is saying
exactly
any more likely than 3 months ago. It's official state narrative and nothing more.
And that's fake news. When you arbitrarily shift beliefs just because it's convenient, you can't trust yourself when politics dominates truth. Anyway, we got to go into a break, Peter. One thing that gives me a little bit of optimism here is that I think it's working, but I think it's mostly working in the echo chamber, bubble, ivory tower things that we call a lot of our cities. And I don't think it's working that well elsewhere. And it might just be another case of like classism or something like that. But I don't know, I might be wrong here even. A lot of what we're talking about, the CIA and the intel community driving this stuff, I think it is working to us, not on us, but I think we perceive it as working because we're kind of stuck in some of those bubbles, I'm guessing. And I'm guessing there are a lot of folks outside of them across the country who don't buy into it, who see what's happening like we do, who it's definitely not working on, and who probably live in communities where it's not deeply affected by them. It's not deeply affecting them. Anyway, I complicated stuff to talk about, and it's kind of hard to even verify or know. We're going to go into our break.
The most unfortunate part about it.
Yeah, that you can't know, because we're theoretically stuck in it, right? Is that what you're saying, Peter?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. That's the thing. We'll keep trying to pierce the bubbles. We're going to be coming back on the other side of this break with our guest, Peter Coffin. For those listening, Peter Coffin is a YouTube comedian and author known for their eponymous channel and for being recognized as one of YouTube's first 50 partners back in 2006, pardon me. They've gained widespread popularity for their original comedic sketches, parodies, and characters. And check out their book, Custom Reality. And you also follow Peter on YouTube, Patreon, Twitter at Peter Coffin. Purchase their book on Amazon. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Octung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back and talking corporate pride with Peter Coffin, our guest. And no, I am not talking about Silicon Valley having a bit of a self-righteous sense about its future. I'm not even talking about General Motors or General Electric looking back to their halcyon days when they, in their own words, drove the nation, that kind of thing. No, I am talking about Pride, the LGBTQIA+, et cetera, festival that has been successfully derailed, co-opted, rainbow washed, I don't know what by corporations, the United States around, and increasingly the world around, although admittedly a lot of this stuff is still in the United States. Anyway, Peter, I saw you talking about this on Twitter. And it could be a slightly thorny issue because just on a very simple level, if you're criticizing pride, then one assumption would be, okay, you're criticizing gay people or bi people or et cetera. You get my point. You're criticizing people who would identify with and maybe benefit from some of the cultural promotion that pride represents. But at the same time, if it's Raytheon, if it's big like military industrial complex companies that are changing their Twitter abbeys so that they have rainbow backgrounds, if you can post a square with colors in it and suddenly become a moral paragon, I don't know if that's a functioning society or at least a functioning situation. Peter, I hear we dropped you for a second. I hope we have you back. What do you think? we dropped him. We don't have him back. That's a damn shame.
Yeah. Modification of, I don't know, race, of pride, of et cetera, et cetera. It is it is weird, right, on some level.
We have him back.
He's back. Excellent.
We have him back. Peter, I gave this long setup that was probably tedious, partly because I knew we lost you for a second, and now we have you back. Anyway, corporatized pride, and I'm talking Pride the Festival. I saw you talking about this on Twitter, Raytheon and these other big companies, a lot of military industrial complex companies, changing their Twitter avatars to like rainbow-colored rockets or something like that, as if that justifies their existence. What's your take on Pride the Festival and Pride the movement at this point?
Well, it's a co-optation of, what was at one point a radical thing. There was a movement of, the LGBTQ people who were not accepted by the society, and all of a sudden you have involvement of a lot. Sorry, I'm a little bit flustered from losing the call. Over the last 30 years, it has been for instance, you have had police who have been involved with it, and there's always the apologetics that comes from the pride organizations that are running it. There's ExxonMobil sponsors. You have various large companies that are involved in the military-industrial complex, as you said, which are sponsors. And it's just...
But just because you're gay...
that was once radical...
doesn't necessarily mean that you can't push a button to kill somebody abroad or work at a, missile company or be a cop that, abuses and beats people. Gay people can do all of those things.
Specifically, the people involved in the thing.
Well, I guess my point is, meaning, what is the issue with the co-optation of this? Well, I don't see the distinction where one is antagonistic to the other. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, my issue with it, at least, I believe that when you look at it, you're looking at something that's talking about liberation. It's talking about freedom. It's talking about, pushing people to stop. For instance, if you go back into the 70s, people were much more frequently killed for simply having a different sexuality. This type of thing existed to resist that. And now it exists more as kind of a corporate front, a means to interface with the public, a way to say, hey, look, these companies have a human face. They are on your side. They are the great stuff. And they access people through their identities, and and I hate to say this because these are companies and they're not people, but they sort of build a kinship with people through this type of an event.
Yeah, they hope that people will feel a kinship for them, and that, of course, is why they're doing it. But at this, so I'm kind of backing Jamarl up, kind of making my own point here. Isn't another way to view this, though, from the perspective of the organizers of the Pride Festival and festivals across the nation? Isn't this a success, and a dramatic success, where over the last couple of years you have these titans, these behemoths, and I mean not a literal physical behemoth, but about as close as you can get to that, with a military company, a substantial one, and a lot of them all in unison coming out, effectively supplicating is one way to look at it, changing their messaging because they're worried about the backlash. It's not because the assumption here, it's not out of any genuine, heartfelt shift culturally. It's that they were made to do that by the gay rights movement, and also generally by the success of changing the intentionally changed mores, for better and for worse, on gender, sexuality, gender identity, all those issues. Isn't this a success for Pride, Peter?
I would say no, because the material problems that gay people, that trans people, that all these deal with, like you look at, for instance, housing instability, that is an issue that is dealt with much more in the LGBTQ community than it is in other communities. And yet, what does that really do for it? It doesn't really change anything. Acceptance doesn't change that. Like, acceptance is more, you are this thing, I'm okay, just stay away from me, just whatever. It's part of society. That's a thing now. I don't know that I would really consider it them being forced to change anything, because they're able to use it in a way that I think allows a very convenient positioning for them. I think that they're, like, in terms of the United States of America, like, let's say they talk about how great, any group is here. It doesn't matter. because they're terrorizing that group in another country.
Yes, that is true.
Not
by the same token,
not really a concession. It's an aesthetic that they are taking on to avoid any kind of scrutiny, in my opinion, anyways.
Well, I know the company wants to do it. They have every incentive in the world to do it. I mean, if you can have, like, for example, race, sex, gender, all of those things, from the standpoint of a company, those are just vendors. And the more money that those vendors have in their pocket, the more money they can spend at the companies. So I understand why the company would try to commodify, you know, LGBTQ experience or pride, you know, like as if, you know, the Nike making a tennis shoe is somehow representative or somehow associated with this kind of movement of Black Lives Matter or something. But I mean, on some level, though, isn't that a success? I mean, for all of those people that were beat, injured, shot, killed, etc., over the course of 50s, 60s, 70s, and 90s or whatever else, well, you have a situation where they've become so accepted now that they've accepted the ability to work or to be part of these various companies, just like anybody else. I mean, and beyond that point, even if the company wasn't associated with Pride, the Pride event is still going to take place. Meaning the Pride event wasn't going to do anything for those groups anyway, whether the corporate sponsorship was associated with it or not, right? And I guess I don't see this distinction or this these things where they repudiate one another. And I get your point that looking abroad, you have a situation where these companies are basically bombing and killing people abroad while simultaneously representing as if they're associating themselves with Pride. But on some level, don't all companies do that? I mean, don't all companies that we're engaged with, especially from a militaristic capacity, give these commercials and everything else, and they are still doing this stuff abroad? I guess my thing is, I don't see the demarcation point. I don't see the paradox in regards to Pride and the corporate sponsorship. It seems that just the virtue of these guys having corporate sponsorship on some level means acceptance.
Well, acceptance and an actual progression of material conditions for a group, I think, are two different things.
Yes.
Acceptance can be used, in my opinion, to sort of placate or pacify. And I think that ultimately that's kind of what we have here. We have people who they believe, okay, well, these huge companies do accept me. They're fine with me. And that means that I just have to show up at Pride every year, and we show off and we get our acceptance, and that's what we're doing. At this point, in my opinion, it's kind of a means to pacify as opposed to what is it? What's the agenda of Pride? How does it progress the groups that are involved to show up at Pride? It doesn't at this point. What it does is gives you a place to feel good about yourself, and that's not bad. That's not a bad thing at all. We all do want to feel good about ourselves, but at the same time, it provides a kind of a catharsis and an end of the narrative. Like, this is the end of the movie. We won. Yay. It's wonderful. And in reality, that's just not the case. There's so much more that exists in the world. And people who are, not able to travel state lines to go to a Pride parade, like people who are more materially in a worse position, which is statistically more people than are able to show up at the Pride thing. Like there are more of any marginalized group, not just LGBTQ people, they don't have the resources to appear at these things. These are representations of people who are in a more comfortable position than they are.
I guess what I'm worried about is this weird, I don't know, and it kind of has its own it definitely has its own internal logic to it. The United States government uses humanitarian interventionism as its sort of sole justification for breaking the post-Westphalian norms of, national sovereignty and international relations. What justifies doing the declaring of wars and the warring with proxies that we do is when other countries, defy human rights, do things that are abusive to their citizens. I think that LGBTQIA plus rights, et cetera, that those are, clearly have become a part of that conversation, how other governments treat their citizens. And so in some sense, there's a unity between the ambitions and the motivations, the ambitions of the sort of ideas that we have in this country and the incentives and the motivations that different parts of our government follow as they decide what to do with foreign policy. It's a lot of words, but there's this union between the two. Anyway, my point here is I feel like the fact that the CIA put out that ad and the fact that it's the military-industrial complex that's doing these things, it fits perfectly well with the way that our government wants to work. And I can't help but feel like what our government would love more than anything else, whether you're a Republican or probably more likely, realistically, a Democrat, is like the most token, the most gender inclusive, racially diverse president, so that they can have the latitude to do whatever they want on foreign policy, because they will be, protected from too much scrutiny or criticism, because that scrutiny or criticism can be portrayed as bigoted. But is that bigoted for me to say, Peter? Is it wrong for me to say? Because you get where I'm going. That's kind of touchy ground, but I feel like that's the abusive situation that has developed, where we're willing to use humanitarian justifications for invading other countries and killing human beings, all while we protect and use as an aegis this sense of human rights at home. And it's this weird collusion beast thing that seems both new but also foundational, and like it will grow simply. Peter, where do you see that movement going before we close here?
I feel like you're completely right. There's an example, historically speaking, in feminism and how they justified the invading of various Muslim nations. They would talk about the human rights of the women in those countries. I feel like that's definitely it's not bigoted to push back against something like that. If we're talking about the human rights of LGBTQ people in various other countries, when we're talking about invading those countries, what we're talking about ultimately is bombing those people. We're not talking about making their lives materially better. We're not talking about any of that. And that's another reason why I think that this involvement of these raytheons, these global mega powers in pride, that sort of creates this aesthetic, like we care, this is important to us, blah, 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 that does give them the leeway to push in those ways, to push an imperialist program, to end up, as like pushing their own interests in other areas of the world without any real regard for human life, with justification.
That's how it works. It's window dressing. I hear you. It is an aesthetic, and they're not having to pay too fully for it. There's probably some fear. There's probably some fear on the part of the military-industrial complex that they will be left in the wake if they do not make this transition on all of the changing norms on identity and gender relations and all these things. There's probably some fear at the high level that, they're going to get criticized or shut down or scrutinized or whatever, castigated, made fun of even. But I feel like a lot of it is simply incentive, motivation, and what they can do with it. It's not just fear, it's ambition, and they want to use it. They want to use the movement. Peter, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us. Fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Peter Coffin, YouTube comedian and author, known for their eponymous channel and for being recognized as one of YouTube's first 50 partners back in 2006. Why do I keep saying 2016? 2006. They've gained widespread popularity for their original comedic sketches, parodies, and characters. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore how reality works in a world where profit is the driving force. And you can follow them on YouTube, Patreon, Twitter. Purchase their book on Amazon. Follow them, Peter Coffin. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. Coming back on the other side, taking your calls as we close today's show out. 202-521-1320 is the number. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Less talk, more phone. 202-521-1320 is the number. Will, calling in from Chicago. Will, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys, I wanted to talk about the virus lab leak theory.
Totally.
Basically, I think that we're in the kind of age of information wars right now, and don't listen to the spooks, like, you know, without a grain of salt, I guess. But at the same time, I feel like sort of woke language was used when people were questioning early on if it came from a lab, if it came from the Wuhan virology lab, and they were saying, you know, it's xenophobic. To me, it seems more xenophobic to talk about a wet market as opposed to virology labs that every country, including countries in the West, Canada, U.S., utilize for. And then here's the operative word, gain-of-function research, where they're taking these viruses, they're making permutations on the viruses in order to establish and patent now vaccines and cures for the viruses. So that's more sort of where I wanted the conversation with Peter to go.
Interesting.
Gain of function, which for me, who cares about the truth, honestly? It's like, for me, I just want to sort of build an anti-capitalist movement. So if I can use this sort of gain of function, I don't think we should be doing gain of function. I don't think we should have viruses, labs chock full of viruses, so people can get well.
I think we should. And I do care about the truth. If I had a movement, it would be something like a pro-truth movement, not an anti-capitalist movement or whatever. But I think I hear you. On the gain of function research, here's why I think that you can defend gain of function research. Viruses are like the most, at least in terms of type, they seem to be the most numerous living organism, quote unquote living. They seem to be the most numerous organism on this planet. There's a question of whether or not viruses are life. But the role of a virus, not just in infecting you and giving you influenza or the common cold or whatever, but the role of virus in like horizontal gene transfer, the role of viruses in life, of simply understanding them, let alone protecting them, seems intrinsically important enough to me for the progression of science that we should totally be doing that kind of research. We should totally be doing that. And then what you want is extremely stringent safety protocols so that you don't have accidental releases, as is, of course, suspected in this case. Now, you bring up a very interesting point, though, which is the idea that it was more racist to single out the wet market than it is in a weird way, which was the assumption back in the day, early on in the pandemic, than it is to focus on the idea of a lab leak. And that's interesting. And I think I agree. But it's interesting. Jamarl, what do you think?
Why is it more racist for the wet market?
Because
that is distinctly Chinese, as far as I can tell, or at least it's distinctly not American. There's an other there that we're blaming this problem on. But whereas everybody does the lab stuff pretty much.
Wasn't there a transfer once before at a wet market?
Yes, I believe it was SARS.
So it wasn't like, so it's not like, oh, this is, dramatically unlikely that this would have. No. I mean, from the standpoint of the transfer, that's the out, if that makes sense. Like, because otherwise, how did it happen? I mean, one of the arguments that's being made now is, hey, we don't have the animal. We don't have the animal. We don't have the,
that was made back then. Right. I remember talking about this when I was coming into the show to do my reports, because I was doing reports on COVID. I was like, they're trying to figure out what animal it could be. People are talking about a bat, but scientists, who I was reading, we're saying it's more likely to be a pangolin, a relatively unknown animal. Anyway, where I would say it explicitly gets racist, and Will, I'll turn it back to you. We got a couple more callers, so I want to be kind of quick here on my end. Okay. I remember talking with people who were like, yeah, the Chinese, they really got to get a handle on the wet markets. That stuff is dirty. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And there's a connotation. There's an emotional carryover thing where you start to think of the Chinese in those ways. And that's where I feel like it could quickly get racist.
I think the thought of, I think it's backwards. I think you think of the Chinese in a particular way, and the wet market is secondary. Mm-hmm. Meaning when people are thinking about that and those ideas and everything else that are associated with the wet market and everything, I think those ideas are explicitly linked to Chinese, not the market. The market is secondary to the thought, if that makes sense. Okay. That's my thought. Anyway, I could be wrong.
I hear you. Will. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you, Jamarl. Will, what do you want to say?
Perhaps gain of function research is necessary and useful thing that we're doing. We should get, as is maybe war and weapons manufacturing, as is healthcare, as is prisons, perhaps. But the thing that we really should create a movement against is people directly profiting from it, because then the incentives get messed up.
That I agree with.
Thank you, guys.
Will, thank you for the call. That's something I'm open to that argument. I would need to think about it in that specific case, and
it's
I
like,
will.
Should people profit from war?
I hear you.
Like, if the country is at a war, should profiteers be able to make a ton of money off of it? And think about the incentives that creates around the world if they can, that type of stuff. That's where he's coming from. Or even medical stuff. Or even the COVID vaccines. Like,
science gets tricky because science in the modern sort of scientific revolution sense, wasn't founded by capitalists. It was founded by aristocrats
Right.
who were independently wealthy and were playing
Yes, they had
games
time. Right.
with material science and life and microbiology and everything to gain prestige effectively. And because, there's intrinsic interest in it. I don't want to use prestige but that's a lot. They were competing over who could discover things fastest. Anyway, Will, thank you for the call. Tarif from New Orleans, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. Dungeons are Craig Murray and West Peppermint again. I was talking about the Middle East. Journalists should go overseas to find out what happened with they had 30 servicemen that was killed in one day in 2011, Navy SEALs.
What are you talking about? What story are you talking about, Tarif?
They had a guy on your father's show, the backstory was talking about that they came out with evidence saying that the narrative that was coming from the State Department was something totally different.
On what issue? What are we talking about here?
The issue it was about 30 Navy SEALs that was killed in one day on a helicopter.
But where? I'm trying. I can look into it because if you said it was on my dad's show, Lee's show.
All right, it was in Afghanistan.
Okay.
It was in Afghanistan. Okay, the narrative was that they was killed on the helicopter, but some evidence came out. Some people saying that no, it was something different.
Yeah, I remember this. You're talking about the 2011. It has a Wikipedia article and everything. 2011 Afghanistan Boeing Chinook shoot down.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yes, but the guy was on the program, one of the fathers of the fallen soldiers, fallen Navy SEALs. I gave them an idea what to do to send a journalist over there to like Pakistan or UAE, and they have a broadcast, a radio signal to the area where the helicopter was sitting down to find out if they had any witnesses in the area, to find out if anybody filmed it. Well, if they can get the evidence, they can write an article. If it's something totally different from what the the Department of Defense said or the administration said, then that would be that would send a political shockwave through D.C. if the story was something totally different than
that would hopefully become significant. I doubt that it would be a shockwave, but hopefully it would send a bit of a shock. I just feel like things that are disadvantageous for the Pentagon tend to get shut out of the media by and large. But I like the idea, and the idea of sending journalists to cover things in places, not just because I'm open to it myself. It's a good practice. Tarif, thank you for the call. We have on the line now Nathaniel calling in from Atlanta. Nathaniel, you're on. What's going on?
Hey, real quick. I just wanted to call about the lab leak theory. Just want to thank you guys for talking about it. My wife thinks I'm a conspiracy theorist for anything I talk about these days. But when it comes to all lefty media, she hates them, but she loves Jamarl. So anytime Jamarl talks about,
well, that's nice. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. No problem. I appreciate it, y'all.
Hey, Nathaniel, thank you for the props. Lab leak story. It is interesting, and you said I think that she calls you a conspiracy theorist. I don't even know if, and I'm not trying to be too critical here. This isn't. It could be seen as a conspiracy theory, or it could just be seen as a theory.
It's just a hypothesis.
It's a hypothesis.
That's all it is.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that's what we call things that we don't like calling conspiracy theories. I guess it's a hypothesis that JFK. I'm just kidding, but
well, it's a hypothesis since we don't know.
Yeah, well, by definition. But I guess my point is, who would have had to conspire here? The conspiracy, quote unquote, wouldn't be about releasing the virus, which by all accounts, from what I can tell, would have been accidental. The vast majority of accounts, it would have been covering it up. That's where the conspiracy comes in.
Right.
But I don't know. It's a cover up at that point. But I hear you. And Nathaniel, thank you for the comment. Thank you for the call. Please call back in anytime you want to. We got to close today's show out. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Have a great day and see you on the other side.